fundraising for the fund. We started almost exactly a year ago because based on the docs, we have a year to do all of our fundraising. But we started almost a year ago, 10 months ago, with Sergey Brin as our anchor LP, and kind of started at 45 million for the fund size. We think we're going to land around 100 million, though we still have a couple more million to raise. Not that we need to raise $1 million from y'all, but if you just happen to know somebody who wants to do fantastic investing with us, then this would be the time in the next 9 weeks.
Super. I think that's the direction. And I think more important than the entire venture fund is the cause that you're right now working towards. And I picked up three words, which is net positive to nature, from some of your recent talks and some of your recent sharings. Would love to kind of explore more about that. What does net positive nature mean in a time when the entire world is going through a pandemic? There is a season of gloom around, and you have been a major proponent of talking about net positive nature, net positive civilization, and with this venture, I believe you want to forefront that.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely the goal of the work that we do. And there's a full like 34-minute talk if you go to tomchi.com, it's up there, but I'll just share super quickly the origin of the phrase. So I think that as people look at what's happening in terms of the different crises around the globe and climate destabilization and social unrest and all these sorts of things, then a lot of times they go back to the idea of, well, there's just too many people. We have 7.8 billion people and growing. There's no way. There's no way that we can, fit all this on this earth and have it be harmonious. And what I share in that talk is the fact, actually, that if you were to look at all of human biomass, so take all the mass of all of humanity, it ends up being about 350 million tons. And if you take all the biomass of ants on the planet, it's also about 350 million tons. Now, that's just an interesting fact. Like, there's basically the biomass of ants is equivalent to the biomass of humans on the planet. But what does that have to do with being a net positive? Well, equivalent biomass is something that we have in common with ants. But one way that we're different from ants is human beings eat a little bit less than 3% of their body weight per day, which ends up being about 10 million tons of food every single day. Ants eat 30% of their body weight per day, which means they eat 100 million tons of food every day. They literally consume 10 times more of the planet than we do every day. But we don't freak out about ant overpopulation. So what this is basically saying is it is possible to consume even 10 times more of the planet, but it's not so much the amount, it's the style. And the style in which we are consuming 1/10 of what ants consume is an extremely damaging style. Like wearing down the soils, poisoning the rivers, poisoning the air, imbalancing the atmosphere in terms of greenhouse gases. That's the style in which we're doing it. As opposed to ants, when they go and consume literally 10 times more of the planet than we do every single day, they do it in a style that is a net positive to nature. They aerate the soils, they recycle nutrients, they do so many beneficial things that actually more grows in all the places that they decide to be. And if ants can figure out how to do it, and ants are a great model organism on this, because number one, ants are omnivores. It's not even about just being a plant eater and all that sort of thing, though there are absolutely ants that are just plant eaters and others that are hunters and all that sort of thing. They're social organisms. They cooperate in a society. There's so many things that are actually quite similar to us, but one thing that they figured out that we haven't figured out yet is can you consume 10 times more of the planet than we do, but do it in a way where the planet ends up healthier every day. And basically the prompt was, well, if ants can figure it out, then I think we can figure it out too. And we got to go set that as a goal. And we need to set that as a goal at the highest level for all of civilization, not just a local goal like, oh, can I make this one factory more efficient, or can I figure out how to reduce the greenhouse gases on a particular product. It's like, no, if you set that level of goal, then you just think about all the systems that add up to it in a very different way, and you start to think about the investment process way more holistically toward what it looks like for humanity to reach that goal. And I think that's the very optimistic way to go think about this framing. The pessimistic way to think about this framing but I think it's actually just as motivating, is any civilization that is a net negative to nature has a death date by definition. So let's say, you are net negative to nature, but you're not even that net negative to nature. Let's say you're only 0.1% negative to nature every year. Well, it means your civilization will collapse within 1,000 years. And that's actually what we've seen with many civilizations throughout the millennia. They go for a while and they get to a point where they start to be net negative to their environment, and then boom, 100 late years after that, they've collapsed, or 200 years after that, they've collapsed, even if they've been going for 1,000 years ahead of there. And that should be a good sign to us. It's like, well, we basically need to figure it out. There must be some point in human history we're going to go figure this out. And the small ambition of this firm is, let's just try to set the example. Let's see what it looks like to try to figure it out, in this generation and not have to wait, 100 years.
That's incredible. And I think one of the most beautiful things about what you shared right now and how you've been looking at this entire field is looking at the core concepts and then probably applying it to domains which have not been thought about, or parallels which have not been drawn yet, and thinking of time horizons which most of us would not even be thinking on, right? And I think that's been the most beautiful elements of how you've literally democratized how prototype thinking works, or how genius thinking works, right, over time. And I just wanted to take a segue from there into, if you were to take and apply some of the same concepts in the education world, and given that we are an edtech startup at this point in time, into learning and into how children learn, how would you look at that, and how would that happen?
I think, somebody I was talking to recently kind of referred to education as the kind of the meta disruptor for everything. Like if our world was educated in a way that they started to you know have the tools to access to be able to understand each other, to collaborate with each other, and they were educated in such a way where creativity was as important as just kind of more basic skills learning, then you start to get into the kind of world where a lot of the problems that we face, we can start challenging them at a more basic level in terms of how we choose to face them. Because yeah, I mean, we can jump into any one of the areas, but a lot of what is ailing the world right now is a thing that could be relatively easily solved if the different parties involved had more of a shared base of education and understanding.
Well, uh, and I've been thinking about this very deeply from what you shared right now. Education being the meta disruptor within this, and being able to kind of reach out to way more people by how you think about it, and how you're planning it, and how you're planning in decades and years, and not in a very short time span. Specifically, of how the pandemic's played out and how COVID's played out, right? And I read this somewhere about you, that you had by the age of 7 you hadn't picked up a language, and you were dependent
That's
on
right.
pictures and numbers to kind of do all the learning. And by the age of 15 you were already an astrophysics researcher. uh, and I'm sure when you think about that, or when you look at that right now, I'm sure a lot of students would be stuck pretty much at the same place, right? If you had to go back to the same Tom right now, or figure out a Tom today in the world, how would this manifest in his life? Or how can we take back some of these concepts to fix some of those fundamental problems which pretty much exist in most developing nations today?
Yeah, I was illiterate until I was 7 because kind of an accident. I was born in Taiwan, and then my family moved to the U.S. when I was 2. And by the time I was 2, I didn't really have any language skills to speak of. Definitely couldn't read or write. Couldn't understand that much. Maybe I spoke a couple words in Taiwanese or Mandarin. That's kind of it. But then when we got to the States, like we were immigrant family, did not have much money, so the parents were working multiple jobs. They weren't home really teaching me things. Like they found some understanding neighbors that would keep an eye on me, when they had to work extra shifts and that sort of thing. But those neighbors weren't focused on like, oh, let's go read a book, let's go teach them all. So by the time I got to school at age 5, I couldn't read, write, or speak any language. I could understand some words, but this will give you a sense of how little language I had. My name is Tom because on the first day of school, they asked me what my name was, and I couldn't understand that sentence. So they just named me because they could tell it's like, well, it's not going to answer. We'll just name you Tom. So I got named on my first day of school because I could not understand the question. Um, so yeah, no, when I said I was illiterate, I like really mean it. Like I actually could not
Wow.
understand a lot of really basic things. But like what I will say the gift of that was is that it gave me a longer period of time where I came to know the world through when I say pictures, I think about like moving pictures. Like I would see how something works. Like you see a little ball roll off a table, and you're like, and you're kind of like um, computing is too strong a word, but like you're using almost as like the basic unit of understanding, just the direct observation of what happened in the world. And in a way, like what I teach with prototype thinking is an extension of that, right? It's like don't get too caught in what you conceptually believe might happen. Just try things and see what actually practically happens in the world. And I've taught it to lots of folks around the world, people that have a lot of education, people that have very limited education, and it's really brought out a lot of creativity, capability, improvement for folks. And the way that I think about why it works so widely, with so many different audiences, is I think what is happening is I'm reteaching people the way that they learned between the ages of 2 and 5. Right, during that time period, we pick up a huge number of skills, not all of them verbal, right? But, like, clearly all of our minds are capable of it. You see a kid at age 1 or 2, you see them at 5, it's dramatically different. Like, there's almost no other 3-year time period that you can imagine in your life where you learn so much. And, like, I think what I'm basically teaching people is to re-access some of that way of learning. And I also think, verbal ways of learning are also fantastic. I like got onto that a little bit later, but I think because I had just kind of an extended time period, like up until 7, and actually even when was able to start like conversing, reading, and writing at 7, then I still had a very strongly developed sense of being able to go think in pictures and numbers. So then it was is easy for me to then like astrophysics is effectively just thinking in pictures and numbers. Like there's very few words in astrophysics.
Incredible. In fact, I think you ended up answering one of the questions that we had received and that I had is how do you kind of adapt prototype thinking to kids? But what you right now shared is that kids are always in prototype thinking mode. And that's pretty much default for them. It's us adults who need to kind of go back and learn how to prototype thinking versus teaching kids how to think in that manner.
Oh, that's exactly right. Like the very, you know, I think actually they would agree with this. So I don't really think it's an insult. Like it was a whole interesting moment. The very worst, student group that I spoke to that trying to teach them prototyping was an elite Japanese business school. And like these are the people with fantastic educations that, like it's like a 0.2% acceptance rate or something, like definitely less than 1% acceptance rate to this school, and like these are the top of the top. And like we go through all the lectures and I teach them all these basics, and it's like, all right, now it's time to prototype. And they were frozen, and I had to go table to table, and it's like, no, you're building it now. And like I was banging on the table, and honestly I felt like I frightened everybody. Like you should have just seen the looks on their faces. Now, eventually, after going around all the tables and banging on everybody's tables, like for 15 minutes, this was during a segment that they were only supposed to prototype for 10 minutes. I had to go bang on tables for 15 minutes before they started making anything. And then even then, they just kind of barely eked something out. I was like, oh my God, what happened? And it's like, sometimes you build up all these layers of expectation around trying to get it right in the educational context. And I think, there's a really important sense, because there are disciplines where there is a single right answer. So like, in scientific disciplines, we are constantly in pursuit of the ever refining, better, like better and more clean and more crisp understanding of the natural world. And there is a right answer. But like you get into this, Now, your right answer might be the right answer for this century until we learn something more about physics or biology, and then we'll go even deeper, right? But there is a level which is like the best way that we know how to explain this now. But what school does not teach us as well is a lot of disciplines like engineering or design or the arts or what have you, where what is the right answer? What is the one right song you can make? What is the one way that you can build a circuit? Like clearly there's not one right answer. And many disciplines are expressive disciplines, not reductive disciplines. And in school, we actually over-index on reductive disciplines. And because of that, people start to believe that learning is just reductive disciplines. And then when you get to, generative disciplines where you're like, you're going to build something new right now, then they're like, what? How do we start? What's the right answer for what to build? And it's like, no, 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 no. Like the basic frame of how you're thinking about approaching this, that's where you're stuck. Like you have to realize that um, any given problem, there's probably 15 ways to design it that would actually work amazingly. And like there's no way to even call any of those the right answer. So like when you get into generative disciplines, you got to be able to go and use your mind in this other way. And this is, going back to the original question, it's like there are folks that were super highly educated, and it made it so that it was way harder for them to access the way that they learned between ages 2 and 5. And then there's other, groups that I taught where average age in a village, average educational, level that was achieved in a particular village might be third grade level. And those folks, I would be like, okay, it's time to build. And they're like already halfway done. And it's like, what happened? And I'm walking around just trying to keep up with everything that's being made, because in that sort of setting, of course, everything that happens needs to be created. Like there's nothing that gets done by arguing intellectually about how you might create a thing. And I'm thinking in particular of this community in Mexico where like, yeah, folks were living on less than $2 a day. Average educational achievement was less than third grade. Man, they built fast. It was amazing. I was like walking around. They had like built like structures by the end of 15 minutes. I was like entering their prototypes like a building. And I was like, how did this get built in 15 minutes? What in the world? So yeah.
What a brilliant
But
takeaway for us on that as well, right? From reductive to generative, and how can we teach kids to kind of remain in that mode forever, right?
or at
And I
least to
think,
have it as one of the skills that they can lean on,
yes,
right?
yes,
Because there is
yes.
some there's absolutely a lot of uses for the kind of reductive disciplines as well. Like you don't want to have to reinvent the laws of physics. Like that was, we've worked it out over 1,000 years, right? But like when it gets to, so you have to be able to use that, but you also need to be able to have some access to the generative disciplines.
No, superb. And I think this reminds me of, and not many people even on this call know this, but Freedom, the flagship product that Stones to Milestones has right now, which essentially helps children learn to read in English, was actually a result of prototype thinking in one of our earlier sessions that we had done. And the shape that is taken today is pretty much thanks to the entire prototype thinking mechanism that Tom's been able to propagate, and we've been able to kind of implement it to an extent that it's currently used by more than 200,000 children globally right now. And we've seen the power of this, right? We've seen the power of being able to not be reductive and generative. And as an organization, we've been experiencing it day in, day out, right? And how we kind of manifest this. To the audience that's on this call, I would also like to say that on my background, there are a lot of Easter eggs related to Tom's life. So by the end of it, if you pick up all the Easter eggs, there's a big surprise that's waiting. We might even get Tom to write a special message for you if that happens.
That's great.
So, Tom, taking on from there, right? And I think taking on from the example of how, say, we were able to adapt and take up prototype thinking as an organization and implement it in our day to day. You work with a lot of Fortune 500 company and a lot of Fortune 500 leaders as such, coach them, work with the likes of Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, and the likes. In fact, not many would know this, but in the first 10 months of Google X, the number of innovations and patents that they filed for was more than half that they'd done in their entire life when Tom was there, right? So that talks a
Yeah,
lot
we
about
created as
how,
many patents in the first 10 months of Google X as Google did in its entire history. So
exact,
basically, yeah, team of 25 outpaced, like 100,000 people.
and that's insane when you kind of think about it, right? And when you kind of put that in the context of building a fast organization or building a experimental organization. How do you end up doing it without breaking things, or is breaking things a part of it? I think that's been a core question that we've always been troubled with or kind of playing with. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I mean, breaking is about scale, right? Like if you go and um, like play soccer and you play hard one day, your muscles are sore. That's fine. That's the sort of thing that grows you. But if what I mean by scale, it's like if you play so hard that you break your leg, then yes, that's what breaking is. And it's like, I think like, when I teach rapid prototyping, part of the point of the rapidness is to reduce it in that zone where you're exercising the muscle and not breaking the bone, right? Like you're figuring out, it's like, oh, how do I go try it out? Really give it a shot, really give it a good run, but in such a way that at the end of the day, like I've strengthened it, I've exercised a thing, I've explored a thing, but I haven't like pushed it to the point where it's ruined the product or service, it's ruined the relationships that we've built to date. And that sounds like a subtle art, but I think it's actually relatively straightforward when you get into it. Like you'll feel it in the sort of stakes that are happening. And a lot of times what I do with folks is, um, when people are real scared of breaking, I'll be like, okay, well, let's lower the stakes. Not because I don't want you to really try it, but let's get it into the zone where you don't feel like you're going to break a bone. Because people are like, oh, we can't show this. We're going to go offend one of our key customers. It's like, no problem then. Why don't you go reach out to somebody who, has been your customer in the past but isn't right now and just try it with them. You can't lose them as a customer again, right? It's totally fine. And that might be a way for you to exercise something that is, with somebody that is just as good a match of your customer, but there's nothing that's really risked there.
I think there's a fundamental learning for us as well, right? I mean, there's always this conundrum between going fast and being able to experiment at the scale that we would want to. And you've spoken about how do you balance adaptability versus scalability as we go along, where the focus
Mhm.
should be on adaptability versus scalability, if I'm not wrong, picking up from one of your talks that I'd
Yeah.
heard. Uh, could you kind of elaborate on that? Is this similar to what you right now shared about when you talk about experiments and doing it in a controlled manner?
So, right. So, a lot of times, as soon as you make anything in the tech world, or really if you make any kind of business, people will be like, oh, but does it scale? And then they'll use that as either like a barrier for you to even try the thing, or like a way to go shoot down something that might have some early promise, but it isn't ready to scale yet. That's just the reality of it. But I think that that is over indexed. I think like we're asking that question a little bit too much. And not because like you don't need to scale at some point, right? Like, if a great idea doesn't eventually make its way out to lots of the folks that you serve, then that's just a real lost opportunity. But like you shouldn't use the question, but will it scale, to be able to go shoot things down? And that's why and a lot of organizations really design um, everything around like, let's go build it for scalability. As soon as we do this, now we want to push it out to 100 million users or whatever your user base is, right? And a lot of times I challenge them to say like, no, actually, what if you design it for adaptability? And adaptability is not like how do you push it out to 100 million users? It's more, what is the amount of time for you to switch from trying one thing to being able to try another thing? And let's get that time to be super small. And as you get that time to be super small, then it's actually very quick for you to figure out problems. Right. Imagine you were trying to solve a math problem and like, whatever you did as your first cut, and it was a really hard math problem. It's not the sort of thing where it's like, oh, right away I can see that the answer is so and so. And imagine that like when you started to do that math problem, whatever the first thing that you wrote down, people were focused on scaling it, and then it was going to get pushed out to every single person in the world to go check your work. You'd be terrified. You'd be like, "Oh my gosh, it's kind of a pretty hard problem, and I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get it right on the first time." This is very unnerving that 100 million people are going to go see the way I did this math problem wrong. But if you said, "Okay, let's talk about the design for adaptability. What if you made it, instead of investing in making it real easy to get to 100 million people, you invested, and look, you should build that capability, but that's not the only thing you should ever ask. What if you also built the capability, especially for problems that you haven't solved yet, to make it so that you each time you try to solve that math problem, it takes less and less time. So now instead of like, oh, man, I got to really get this right. It's about to go to 100 million. You ask yourself, look, the first time I tried that, it took me 15 minutes to give it a go. And now I'm going to invest in design for adaptability, and we're going to make it so that I can try to solve this problem in a minute. Well, now pretty quickly, it's like, okay, didn't work in the first minute, didn't work in the second minute. Oh, learned some real interesting things by the third minute. Oh, I could probably build off of that by the fourth minute. By the fifth minute, oh, let's actually explore this other direction. By the eighth minute, it's like, well, let's combine the output of these two directions. By the 12th minute, it's like the combination of these two outputs is actually pretty great. This makes me think of one other thing. By the 15th minute, you have something brilliant. And it's like, oh, all that happened was you made it real easy to be adaptable. And the adaptation, and really this is what has made life um, so successful on planet Earth as well. Like what I'm teaching in the design for adaptability is also the recipe for the forms of life that have basically been able to survive and live in as many ecosystems as possible on planet Earth. Like those forms basically were the most adaptable. And like, Darwin is often misquoted as just survival of the fittest. But like what he meant by fitness was actually adaptability, not the strongest or the biggest or whatever. Like there's plenty of times that the biggest died out. So like the adaptability is the thing. And you start to think about it as its own metric to go spend time with, get familiar with, and become masterful at. And you'll be able, that's the attribute that allows you to solve problems. And scale is the attribute that allows you to get your solutions to a lot of people. And I think if we can understand those as different activities, then people think way more clearly.
That's beautiful, right? And when I actually try and put it under the context of what's happened over the last 9 months globally, right? All organizations, be it big or small, individuals, be it ha- and career individuals or people who are just starting their careers out, right? People who've been able to adapt have been way ahead of the curve and have been able to survive or even come out victorious throughout these 9 months versus people who are kind of a bit more rigid or were only looking at scale from a very narrow or focused dimension, as you kind of spoke about it. But I have a bit of a conundrum out here, right? When you talk about adaptability and when you talk about experiments, experiments are, as we see it, are always a lot micro, right? It's on the ground. It's something small. It's something controlled, right? At the same time, as leaders within the organization, and you've led really large teams, right? How do you make sure that the macro doesn't get lost? That you're still thinking about, okay, how will this pan out? How are we solving 10 years ahead or 100 years ahead for a problem that's not been solved? How do you go through this
Yeah.
conundrum, and how do we kind of deal with this when we're right now, say, doing a micro experiment or trying to figure out something on the ground?
Yeah, what you do is you don't try to you don't want to go try to predict the future by laying out a overly rigid strategy. What you do is just define the parameters a bit. And one way that I define parameters is through a concept which I call learning frontiers. So like a frontier is not like one pinpoint, plan or map or whatever. It's like, oh, this whole broad frontier. If we're able to kind of push forward anywhere on these frontier, we're moving forward. And like, but it still gives you some definition as opposed to all the arrows pointing in whichever direction. And an example of learning frontier is, let's say you have, you've got a great product, and every time the customer is using it, they're really getting a lot out of it, and they're really loving it. So that part of it, actually you're doing a good job, and the learning frontier, maybe you've already explored a bunch of it, but a learning frontier that exists in your organization is, how do we get this distributed so a lot of kids or a lot of people are able to benefit? And you can say like, okay, great, let's just sit down right now, and we're going to brainstorm for the next 15 minutes all the experiments that we might be able to do that advances us on the frontier of how to get this, how to get this benefit to as many people as possible. And you'll find your group of 5 people will probably come up with 50 ideas in that time period. And as long as all of those 50 ideas, you can imagine the experiment and the output of that experiment advancing the frontier of like learning how to distribute this to the folks that would most benefit from it, then they're all, pushing forward the collective learning of that frontier without it having to pre-coalesce into something that makes perfect sense as an intricate thing before that's known. Right, because what people try to do is like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. Well, why don't we combine that into a super plan that includes this and this? And first we'll do this that will allow us to do this, and then we'll do this, and then we'll have a blue ocean strategy that's about this. And it's like, whoa, you're way ahead of yourself here, and maybe half of the things that you said are actually not even going to serve the customer or the situation. So you got to back up a little bit. Instead of trying to go overly structure it and strategize, why don't we just say, hey, um, let's have the bar be as low as, if we tried this, do you think we would learn something? And if the answer is yeah, then it's like, cool, that stays in the 50. How about this one? Oh, that's pretty cool. This one, no, actually, I think we maybe already tried this, so there's maybe nothing new to learn on this one. Let's actually just write down what we already learned from this one, no problem. And then you go to the next one, it's like, this one is not totally on the frontier. This is kind of like in a different category. So we'll put it in a different area when we're working on that frontier, no problem. But you just imagine going through that 50, you're going to end up with a bunch that are clearly going to drive some learning on that frontier. And then you just say, how do I reduce the time to try things? And how do I be adaptable about trying those? So trying the 50 things takes you 2 weeks instead of 2 years. And then you'll check in 2 weeks from now. It's like, oh, great. We had the 10 members of the team all do 5 experiments each over the last 2 weeks. We accomplished all 50 experiments. Fantastic work for everybody. And let's go write the results of each of our experiments on the board and see where we are now in terms of where the frontiers moved to. And then you can sit down again. It's like, well, now the frontier is here. Let's go talk about, what is left to learn beyond the frontier. And then you just repeat that a couple times, and you typically end up very, far along in a short amount of time.
Wow. Um, I think we could just go deeper and deeper into that and kind of take up the entire conversation. But I loved the fact that you distilled it down to a very, very simple question. If we try this, will we learn something? And it's a beautiful takeaway, right? When we look at experiments, we try to kind of have every metric around that. We try to kind of close it with a lot of doors and try to reboot it in the right manner. But just having that one question answered makes it so much more easier to actually go and run those experiments versus the load that would have otherwise happened. And that
And
takes
people
me.
that are raising the concern they're coming from a good place, in that, most of the time they're coming from a good place in that they think to themselves, well, if I let this thing go through that, doesn't seem like a good idea, and we end up, taking 5 weeks to make it and then 2 weeks to evaluate it, then I don't know, next thing you know, 2 months are gone. But like, so they think, well, if I just, raise the objection in this meeting and we kind of argue about it for half an hour, I might be saving us 8 weeks, right? But if you can get to the world where you can just, divide and conquer and have a lot of people try different things, and the amount of time to try a thing is half an hour by itself, then why would you debate a thing for half an hour that takes a half an hour to do? Then you're actually holding the team back. Like if you could have done it in half an hour, we could have actually just known the actual answer in half an hour. If we argue about it for a half an hour, we don't know the answer yet. You've just asserted a bunch of things, and I've heard a bunch of your assertions, and I asserted a bunch of things back, and you heard my assertions, and we're like, should we do it yet? So like really nothing has happened in half an hour. But this is why the rapid part of rapid prototyping, because this kind of debating way and slow evaluative way, well, first off, you need to first make the distinction of, are we accidentally trying to be abstractive on an expressive discipline, where we're trying to go
Wow.
force one perfect single answer. But assuming you're not making that mistake, then like, in the world where you're not making that mistake, it would still be rational to try to spend more time talking about a thing if the time to go try it was many months, right? Spending 2 days to go talk about a thing, if it takes 3 months to try it, that's still rational, even on an expressive discipline. But if you can reduce the time to try to 30 minutes or 15 minutes or an hour or two, then it makes no sense anymore to go debate a thing for an hour or two. Like you are literally worse off, because you could have known the actual answer in that much time. and all that you ended up with instead was a discussion, and maybe you feel a little different, or you think a little different, but actually even you thinking different might not be based on something that's true. You might have been convinced, by the other person who's just very skillful at talking that, oh yeah, yeah, you're probably right. When in fact, if you were to try it, they were totally wrong. So like you can actually even take steps back when you spend that 2 hours, when of not doing it. So this is why the rapid part, if you make it, fast enough, then the cost becomes way lower to try than it is to talk.
So is it fair to say being a faster organization and doing more experiments reduces the cost in your own head to do that many experiments, and you end up doing that faster, and hence you figure out way more things before a lot many more people, and hence some of the top organizations have kind of shown this time and again and been able to do that, and hence that's the reason why they are there at the top.
Absolutely. And lots of different things I can share about this. So one thing that I often share with corporate audiences is, my calendar for the week for a lot of my teams that are like creating new things for the world. And a very normal feature of that calendar might be on Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, there might be a 2 or 3 hour block where we're testing with customers. And people look at this calendar and they're like, wait, you're saying 4 to 6 hours? There's no way I can add 4 to 6 hours to the week. But I tell them right out, it's like, if you add these 4 hours, you're going to save 15 hours of arguing. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, well, this is what happens in a normal organization. If user testing is very far away and you don't know when you're going to do it, you'll sit there and you'll debate it. And then it takes the whole week to debate it. And you come back and you're still debating. And then 2 weeks are gone. It's like all these hours of debating as to what to do. But when you have a customer test every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, the conversations that instead of becoming a week-long debate sound like this. Okay, I want to do it this way. Well, no, I totally disagree. That's a dumb way to do it. It should be done this way. And then I'll just pause the team and be like, cool. Well, can you try yours tomorrow? And can you try yours tomorrow? And they're like, yeah, yeah. And it's like, good. Then we'll just talk about the answer tomorrow. And that's the entire argument. Because like you're always either on the day of a user test or one day away from a user test. So there's never a point where people are, or if they need another day, it's like, okay, it's Monday, you need until Thursday to use the user test, fine. But like, let's stop having the argument, it's fine. So like all these things that would be very long, hour-long arguments in a meeting, like we'll stop that argument in 30 seconds and we'll spend the 40 minutes in the meeting to just make the thing. And then by the end of the meeting, it's like, oh, well, we got the thing to test now because you made yours and I made mine, and whatever, the boss made a third thing, it's fine. And like that's it. That like it just you skip all the arguing, which could have easily taken that 40 minutes, and you just made three things in the same time period, and they'll all be tested tomorrow. It really does save a huge, like, people add the 6 hours or 4 hours, and they're like, why do I have so much time now? Like there's like 10 more hours in the week that I don't even know what to do with. Like, should I take up a hobby? Like, what do I do now?
And you end up kind of breaking all the hierarchy, all the group thing that might still exist or that might be present within the organization or within individuals, right? And I would, at this point in time, would love to take a segue into something that's really close to our hearts. So as we are building out this mission, the idea is to build out a company, and one of our core values is joy of working, right? And how do you not compromise joy of working while you're doing everything that you can to make the mission successful, right? And not at the cost of performance, definitely, right? And I've heard you talk about company vision versus life mission, and how does one work to integrate that, or what are your views on that specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So I draw like a simple Venn diagram, and it's like this is the company's mission, like the things it needs to advance in the world, versus your life's mission or your life's purpose. And I talk about a couple different scenarios that are a problem, and then like where the healthy zone is. So like first I draw as a Venn diagram where there is, the subset of it is overlapping, because some people are like, oh, the perfect job is the thing where every single second of the job completes everything in my life mission. And it's like, no, there's more to life than just getting your job done. Like you've got your family, you've got your friends, you've got your own personal development, you've got things that you love and care about, you've got a book that you love, you have a TV show that you can't miss because it inspires you. Like those are not about getting your work done. It's totally fine for life to have a bunch of things. And if there's nothing in your work but life, if there's 100% overlap between, your work and quote unquote everything in your life mission, then you probably did not really spend very much time understanding your life. So do not try to go make a life where 100% of it is you try to deal with 100% of your needs at work. It's too much. So like first off, don't make it 100%. Second off, don't make it 0%. Don't make it less than 10%. That's too low. That's you coming in. It's like, well, I don't really like the job, but like once every 3 months, there's like a moment where it's like it was pretty good. I was like, oh, well, I mean, it's overlapping a little bit, but really it's a little bit. It's like 1%. It's like 3%. You're starving. Like something between like 10% and 40% is pretty healthy. You go to work, you know that, every single day that you're working, part of your life mission is advanced. You go home and you play with your kids or you hang out with your friends and part of your life mission is advanced. And like that's where, that kind of completeness comes from. And it's less about balance per se, because I think that makes it overly quantitative. Because I think like people feel this out more than they quantify it.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, it's like you go in there, it's like, no, I feel like a little bit overstressed about this. Like how do I like punch it up a little bit, or how do I relax it a little bit so it gets into a different way of being relative to this imbalance.
Oh, incredible. And I think that's such a beautiful thing to take away, and specifically how deeply you talk about it, even from your past experiences that you've had. Is there one thing that you would have done differently at some of these organizations when you were there, uh, to kind of make this come alive a bit more better, a more tactical advice as such for the team that's out here right now?
Oh yeah, that there actually is a really tactical piece of advice. So I basically, so a really normal thing that happens in organizations is, let's say you're the manager or you have a manager. That's probably true of everybody in the organization, right? So it's like, and there's a real normal thing that people do, which is called the one-on-one, where it's like, okay, once a week, I want to go sit down with my direct report, or once a week, my manager is going to ask me to one-on-one and give an update. And a lot of people fall into this pattern where they might have a 30-minute one-on-one once a week. And what that ends up being filled up with is just the day in, day out, week to week, the stuff of the business. And there's no problem with that. Like you can get some productive work done like that, but you typically don't get that much deeper with people. You get in the zone of like, oh, what's your update? Well, I got this done. Oh, this is delayed by 2 days. Oh, I'm actually ahead by a day on so and so. I might need some help on this. And people are like, oh, good, good, good. I'll do this. And I'll send an email about this. No problem. Forward me that attachment. And that's your 30 minutes. But like what I would do with my teams is I was like, okay, you got two choices. You can have a 1 hour one-on-one once every 2 weeks, or we can do a 2 hour one once a month. And like they're like, oh, okay. And different people chose different things, but in either case, it's totally fine. Because what happened, what I would do is when we have the one-on-one, whenever it was convenient, I'd be like, hey, can we walk somewhere? And it just might be just walking around the building or whatever, just like taking a stroll. It's like, hey, let's go down to the kitchen, let's go do whatever, just like walking in the same direction. And a couple different things about that. When you're walking, you get out of this, oh, we're across the table from each other, or I'm going to whiteboard this thing and I'm going to go and like automatically snap into work mode. And you get into something that is much more of a true conversational mode. And when you make it an hour or 2 hours instead of 30 minutes, then what happens is people run out of their updates after 30 minutes. And then they have to start talking about what their actual experience of work is like. Like it can't help but come out. Like, it's like you get there and I can feel exactly the fizzle out point, because it's like it's 20 minutes in, they're kind of running out of updates. It's 28 minutes in, and it's like, oh, is there other stuff to talk about? And at like minute 31 or 32, it's like, what do we I think that's all that happened in the last 2 weeks. And it's like, oh, great. And then I'll ask a real simple question. It's like, yeah, but how are things going for you? Like what parts of work have been really exciting for you recently? What parts of work do you feel like are still missing, that you've been wanting to happen for a couple months or a couple quarters, but like it just hasn't been part of your work yet. And like we have that deeper conversation that really starts to get into me getting a little bit of a picture into their life's mission. And then I'll ask them real simple questions. It'll be like, okay, because I don't try to, do some psychoanalyst thing and like pretend that I'm like, oh, deeply analyzing things that you don't understand. A lot of times I'll just reflect back to them. It's like, hey, from what it sounds like is a thing that you're really missing is you're getting a lot of work done, but you don't feel like you're really growing or advancing your skills right now. So it kind of sounds like to me, and you can tell me if this is right or not, like you would love it if there was a way to include a little bit more learning in the job. And specifically, you want to learn more about Python, or you want to go learn, more about how to test with customers, or you want to learn, yeah, and whatever it is that they wanted to learn, you reflect back. And they'll nod or they won't nod. Like you don't need to make it a mystery. And like you can actually tell in their level of excitement when they come back. It's like, yeah, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like if we could do that, it'd be so exciting. And it's like, great. And when I hear that kind of energy back, then what I do with them is like, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to make a commitment together that we're going to figure out a way to do a little bit more of it. Now, I'm not going to go do so much of it that it endangers the company missions. Like you're doing, you stop doing your regular job and whatever. We'll figure out the right balance. But like what we're going to figure out in the next 2 months is some way to have more of that in your life. Is that great? And then folks are like, oh yeah, let's do it. And then on the subsequent one-on-one, then we'll just stay real practical with that. It's like, hey, remember like a couple weeks ago we talked about so and so. Why don't we try this in the next 2 weeks? And then they're like, oh, cool. That would give me a chance to learn that. Absolutely. And what you'll see is that people will really light up. They'll bring a lot more energy to the job. It won't be the same sort of day in, day out. And I have a whole like lecture and article about managing energy and not time. Because like,
Wow.
people do time management. It's like, oh, I've made 2 more hours more efficient in the week. But when they do energy management and you come to work energized because you're excited, it's like, oh, I'm getting to go learn that thing, or I'm getting to go try that thing that we talked about a month and a half ago. They come with 50% more energy. It's like you went from having 40 hours in the week to having 60 hours in the week because they're so much more engaged. And I'm not saying because they're working 6 hours a week. It's just that in the 40 hours that they're working or whatever time that they're typically working, they're just so much more engaged because they're like, oh, I'm looking forward to this and this is happening
Wow.
this afternoon. I get a chance to do this. And that's, practically how you make these things happen.
Wow. And I think that's supremely useful for a team like ours, which is growing right now at an extremely rapid pace, both in headcount and how we kind of show up in the world. And what you right now shared gives me a great segue, and I'll not let you go without kind of reflecting on that. You spoke about life's mission, you spoke about energy management, and we're in India right now, where no matter where you are, what you do, everything by default links back to spirituality and religion. And I think you're one of the prime thinkers when it comes to talking about sciences and spirituality and how they end up combining and the fluidity with which you talk. I've only previously seen or read conversations between Albert Einstein and Rabindranath Tagore who were able to do that seamlessly. And I've seen that, kind of seen glimpses of that, or that from the talks that you've shared around this. And just wanted your talk because, and I took away this one sentence where you mentioned religion as the most elegant social technology ever created. Uh, and in the context of your life's mission and energy management, how would you kind of share more about that?
Yeah, it's a pretty expansive question, but what I'll say is a lot of times, people think about spirituality and um, there's a lot of unproductive ways to think about it and a lot of unproductive ways to interact with other people about spirituality and, a lot of like shaming of spiritual things and all that sort of thing. And for folks that are shaming spiritual things, I really try to simplify it. It's like, well, instead of thinking about spirituality as a thing that's like very abstract and not based in science by definition and is about superstition, all those sorts of things, imagine spirituality just referred to anything that raised or lowered your spirits. Because you know what it's like. You come in the morning, you're like so spirited and you're so energized and life is amazing. And imagine there's practices that you do that lift your spirits. And like whatever practices you do that lift your spirits, that's your spirituality. And some people do it through organized,
Wow.
religion and church. Some people do it through different sorts of practices and meditation. Some people do it through, you know, um, drinking tea and looking out over a landscape. these are all things that practically lift your spirits. And like when you think about spirituality in that way, it helps you to create the sort of umbrella that can be inclusive of so many ways that people have been spiritual throughout all the centuries. You don't need to make the different types of spirituality, enemies of each other. Because you can sit down and you can be like, oh, I get how you do it in this culture. I can see how this would lift your spirits. That's really exciting. And let me teach you the things that I do that lift my spirits. So that's one thing, to go help the folks that are real scared of it. And then, what I do from the science side, because a lot of folks, that are spiritual look at the science side and it's like, oh, that is the elimination of all magic from the universe. And these are the things that, like, you don't believe, you only believe in numbers. You are not a person of real heart. And it's like, whoa, that's just as shamey and terrible as the people that are writing off of the spiritual people. That sounds a little bit off too. And like what I try to show them is, when you really dive into the deep understanding of the universe, then what you just find is endless layers of beauty. And you find endless layers of things that lift your spirits, actually. And like, part of like what's happening here is like, you haven't had a chance to really, go into those layers. You've like shut it off because there was an equation on the board, or you shut it off because it sounded a little too technical. And that's why in my talks where I'm trying to go make that bridge, I try to use very straightforward language, but all in ways that like very directly connect with science that we've discovered over the millennia. And the type of stuff that I definitely come away from with my scientific practice is just a deep sense of awe. Like I've built many sophisticated machines in my life, and then I look at how a leaf works, and I'm like, whoa, that's so much better than any machine I've ever made. It's like, I mean, I worked so hard on all these machines, all these, I got all these patents, and like we did all this sophisticated artificial intelligence and machine learning and like advanced mechanical engineering and autonomous robotics and cars that drive themselves. I've done all these really sophisticated things. And I like look at a leaf or a pine cone or whatever, and it's like, oh man, sheesh, we're hardly getting started at this. But like, I cannot wait until we are like 5% as good as this thing. But like, I wrote about it once because I had three 3D printers in my house, which that's a whole separate story. But because I didn't have enough room in the house, that like one of them was in the kitchen, and like one of them ended up being a pineapple stand because I didn't have room, and I was like, oh, the pineapple will go on this thing. And I remember walking by the 3D printer and seeing the pineapple on it. It's like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could print a pineapple? And yet we're so far away from this. It's like, even though 3D printing is so advanced and people are like, now you can do elastomer, now you can do, multi-material, now you can mix colors, now you can do so and so, now you can use recyclable filament. And it's like, sure, but can you print a pineapple? Like, like that is an amazing, piece of production. And like, I get those moments all the time. And to me, that just like represents how much awe is in there. Like that's a lot of the stuff that people were trying to go capture in the spiritual text as well. And they didn't have scientific language to do it. And a lot of times they didn't have, even just, crisp spoken language to go do it. But they did their best. And you see in every different generation, people are actually basically trying to go translate the awe that they feel, from being alive in this world. And to be able to do that with science, I think is a beautiful privilege as well. And it really connects a lot of parts that might have been harder to connect. Because maybe in one language, somebody wrote a fantastic poem about water and it really brings something forward, but it's hard to go blend that with, some other thing about a flower or some other thing about the rain. And really all of those things are a cycle. They're all, interbeing with each other at once. And like with the scientific lens, you actually see the interbeing, both from the equation perspective and the mechanical perspective and the chemistry perspective and a billion other perspectives. And it actually glues together the poetry, of the millennia. So uh, I know that not everybody has that relationship to science. I think like when you get to see enough of it, you just see how it connects the poetry of the whole universe. It makes all the different things that we've been doing, to understand our lives and the universe make sense together.
Wow. I think I'm kind of speechless at this point in time. I can't think of a parallel where in a 1 hour conversation we could go from discussing one-on-ones to being net positive to nature, then to work-life balance, and closing with joy of working and spirituality, all in the same context, and being able to kind of give back tactical advice in between and going macro and giving back much larger long-term horizon views to people to take back. I think this would definitely has positively changed me, and I'm hoping everyone's been able to take away something or the other from this conversation. I know there are a lot of questions that have come in. We might not have the time. Tom's only with us until the next 4 minutes, so we can. I'd love to open it up for just one question. Just one question. If we have someone already, Aditi, can you help me out with that?
We've had lovely questions on the group, and I think you know one that I like is about what is the role that we as leaders have to play to ensure that we are impact friendly, doing well for our people and doing well for our customers, all while kind of indulging in practices that end up raising our spirits on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Like there is this sensibility of the responsibility of the leader, and it comes from a mold of leadership, which is absolutely one of the ways you can be a leader, but it's certainly not the only way. But I think we've made it overly dominant in current society, where it's like, oh, the leader is the person who gets in front of everybody and has the right plan and like has worked out the things and it's the strong leader that knows better and all that sort of thing. And look, there's situations where that works fine. I'm not even trying to say that that's an invalid form of leadership. It can work in a lot of situations. But I think if that's the only way that you understand leadership, then you feel a lot of pressure and anxiety in the moments where you don't know. You feel a lot of pressure and anxiety when things aren't going well. And like, there's a different kind of approach to leadership that I try to share just as an alternative. And even this is not the only alternative. I have a couple dozen different alternatives here, but this one I think is useful, which is thinking about leadership as just, illuminating shared possibility. And like, and people like, and they say, oh, wow, yeah, that is a thing that we could do together. That's really amazing. And like, that makes it so that it's possible to include your whole group and the world, right? You're illuminating the shared possibility together. And it also means that you don't need to have the perfect plan. Like part of the process of getting to illuminating the shared, a shared possibility is to go ask people, it's like, what do you see as the possibility? And just being kind of a collector of what they're saying. And then you're like, look, a lot of this is shared. Why don't I just come back and point out all the stuff that was shared that people just say? And then all these people like come back and say, oh, we're really going to get to do this thing. That's the thing that I was hoping was possible. That was the thing I was wanting to do. Like, and I was afraid your plan wasn't going to have it. And it's like, well, I was just looking for the shared things that, everybody was saying was really going to lift their spirits, change their lives, like do something that they're hoping to be able to try or do or see or experience. And you think about this as like, like metaphorically, you can imagine it's like the old school leader is the person that's got the one big torch and they're standing in front of the crowd and it's like, follow me. And then and kind of illuminating shared possibility is I'm going to go light everybody's candle. And now the whole world is lit. And that's the way that we're going to see the way out.
Wow.
Just wow.
Such a beautiful note to kind of end this conversation on. But before we end, just Tom, were you able to find out a couple of Easter eggs relating back to you? I know the competition is open for the team, but just wanted to check if you've been able to figure out a couple.
I don't know if I can zoom into your thing enough. Oh, you need to focus on speaker view, and then I need to go pin it. I'm gonna fail this competition. It's totally fine. No, that's fantastic. I don't know. It's okay.
Superb.
So you're gonna need to tell me. It's no problem.
So we'll give this image back to you, and we'll let you come back on that. One definite one you can see. One definite one you can see out here is just about at One Ventures. That's the easiest one I can give away.
That is, yes, that is our logo back there. That's fantastic.
But yeah, so I think we're gonna for a long time to come. We'll be reflecting on this recording, this talk, and I do see myself coming back to this in the future to kind of just draw inspiration in the way you think, in the way you kind of respond, and in the way you kind of show up, Tom. And thank you so much for being out here with us. I will link back to all the other talks and courses that Tom talked about. Tom has a couple of courses coming up in January on prototype thinking as well as future skills. Tom, you want to share about that very quickly with the team?
Yeah, the future skills is basically, I had a lot of people, really anxious about, what happens in the 21st century. Like, do we lose all the jobs? Do AI take it all? Does the climate collapse? All these sorts of things. And the future skills are basically like, well, here are a bunch of the skills, that are going to be really critical for the 21st century, including things like, being more mentally agile and adaptable, but also, things like, I call them the 4 Cs, the things that robots and AI are not going to be able to do particularly well, but through which I feel like a lot of the jobs in the future are going to be built on. And the 4 Cs are creativity, compassion, critical thinking, and community. And like, if your job like helps to advance any of those 4 Cs or a combination of them, you're very unlikely to be automated. And there's a lot of good to bring to the world.
Wow. Even in the closing, you gave us something to take away. Thank you so much, Tom. And do kind of check out his courses. I've personally done the prototype thinking course, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. It will change how you view the world, how you view your own life, how you view your job, how you view your company, pretty much everything around you. Thank you so much, Tom, for taking our time on this 12th anniversary, for being with us. Truly appreciate it. Thanks a ton.
Congratulations on your 12th anniversary, and it's a privilege to be able to chat with you all.
Thank you so much, Tom. Take care. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye.